Welcome to the Smart Driving Cars podcast. Thanks for joining us. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETFs, Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alain Kornhauser. Hi, Alain.
Hey, good morning, Fred.
And we are very happy to have with us Dr. Stephen Polzin. Thanks for being here with us, Stephen.
Delighted to be here. Look forward to our discussion today.
Well, most recently, you served as Senior Advisor in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology at the Department of Transportation. You had previously been Director of Mobility Policy Research at the Center for Urban Transportation Research at the University of South Florida. Let's start out with your thoughts about where we are today, Stephen, when it comes to automated vehicles and the progress there's been here in the midst of COVID-19.
Okay, good issue. It's always fun, particularly as we're after TRB week, where folks' thoughts on some of these issues get stirred and stimulated by various discussions, etc. I've always approached automated vehicles from the perspective of wanting to understand how they're going to influence transportation policy, investment, and planning. My areas of interest include travel behavior and planning. And automation is in effect a new mode or a new opportunity that was certainly anticipated to be hugely disruptive to our historic perception of the travel choices and travel behaviors of the public. As you know, the pace or the thinking in terms of the time frame for deployment and impacts have been shifting and moving. It's one of those things that's been kind of perpetually 3 to 5 years away for at least the last 3 to 5 years, and who knows how long that'll play out. So in some ways, the world has relaxed a little bit, and they've been distracted in this past year with COVID, really sucking the energy out of the attention of a lot of the folks that are involved in planning and thinking about the future and those kinds of things. And as we're at least hopefully nearing the end of the immediate impact of COVID, the issue of the role of automation and how it's been impacted by COVID and how it will emerge as a continuing challenge and opportunity for mobility going forward is something that I'm keenly interested in. And I'm frankly quite sympathetic to the planning community as they think about doing long-range planning and talking about the future. They're really in a tough spot right now. The wind was knocked out of their sails with COVID-19, obviously an unanticipated event that wasn't in any of the scenarios that folks do in their long-range plans. Obviously, automation is still churning along and continues to show some promise and some potential. Perhaps with the impact of COVID, some more thinking about the role of automation, particularly on freight and first mile, last mile connections and delivery. So it's a kind of an interesting time to think about where we're at and where we're headed with transportation as we both recover from COVID and anticipate continuing technology. Certainly automated vehicles is part of that, but obviously driver assist and more technology to enable things like vehicle sharing, TNCs, et cetera, micromobility. All of those things are churning and frankly making it very, very difficult to plan the future from a transportation perspective.
Well, right. I mean, Alan always points out, and he will very shortly, vehicles, there are two categories really here. Vehicles that are safer because of the technology that still require us to be behind the wheel, paying attention and essentially driving. And then there's the truly driverless. So where are we today? I guess the focus still is on the driver assist, right?
Well, I think in the near term, the driver assist is certainly revealing itself. It's much more obviously integrated into new vehicles, and folks, I think, are being accustomed to it, and starting to appreciate certain aspects of it. It does raise the questions of, to what extent can we capture at least the safety benefits through driver assist, and to the extent that we can capture a significant share of the safety benefits, will that mitigate the willingness or ability to transition to fully driverless? In other words, if we're capturing a lot of the benefits while retaining the personal mobility and flexibility and freedom of vehicle ownership, will it deter us from moving to a more MOS style of automated service provided vehicles, at least for huge shares of the public? And as I know Alain is interested in, as are lots of people in the mobility industry, including the US DOT, the opportunities to use the technologies to assist folks that aren't otherwise able to make personal vehicles available to themselves is certainly an audience and in a market that's going to benefit from automation, and certainly driverless is the ultimate there in terms of having much greater freedom for mobility for folks that otherwise are dependent upon somebody else. And so that market and that audience is still very interested. The other consumers, like I say, I do think there's an issue about, will enhanced safety be satisfactory to them, or will they want full automation at some point?
A couple of things in here, Steve. One is, I guess, it seems to me, and there's been an evolution over the past 5, 10, whatever years. Originally, I would suggest that the automobile industry had was putting warning systems in cars, and really focusing on warning, and in some sense really afraid to put in automated things that would basically do things for you, even though you may not ask for it. It took a while for automated emergency for analog brakes, and in my classes I sort of tell the students that look, analog brakes are sort of a marvelous kind of thing. It's a technology that's been put in there that basically goes against what the individual wants at the time that it does it. It says, I know better than the individual. Because if I'm going down the road and I go to slam on my brakes, I push that damn brake pedal to the floor, and the brake pedal goes back and says, hey, Alan, cool. You don't know what the hell you're doing. I'm going to take over because you're really screwing this up. Of course, it doesn't say that, it just does it. And in fact, in 2012, when it was mandated that, the stability control in cars. I mean, again, to me, that's a sort of a marvelous automated system that, again, I'm going around the corner, I'm losing my rear end, I'm about to die. And the darn thing says, hey, Alan, you're stupid. I'm taking over. Move over, get the hell out of here. I'm doing this for you. It might have warned me or something like that, but darn it, it just does it. Which are, I guess, what I call beautiful, I'll put that word on there, automated safety systems that in fact go against what I want, okay, at the instant of time. But after I get a chance to think about it, I'm there, thank you. I'm sweating bullets. To me, that's where automated emergency braking systems, I think, are finally becoming. That instead of just warning us that we're about to hit somebody in the rear end, they're finally taking over. Or instead of just showing us a picture of what's behind us when we're backing up, it actually stops and doesn't run over the child that we don't see. Those are actually doing things against our will in some sense at that point in time. And I think we need to the industry has started to move there, and I think it needs to, of course, move more into that end of it. And what do you think about that whole concept? Because now it seems as if they're categorizing the automated emergency braking systems and certainly the intelligent cruise control pieces as basically comfort and convenience improvements as opposed to safety. But if they're going to claim that they're comfort and convenience, they at least can't make us less safe. Okay.
I think we're seeing a couple things. I think the market penetration is such that there's starting to be, kind of customer appreciation and feedback. The blind spot warning, I think, is the classic one. There's an awful lot of people.
That's a great warning system, I should say.
Yeah.
I hate warning systems.
Yeah.
But it should also go farther. It shouldn't even let us change lanes.
Right.
Or make it harder for us. Okay?
There's a lot of people that have gained confidence in the technology because it's not uncommon to find somebody that, readily admits that protected them from getting in a severe, either an accident or a disruption.
Yeah,
and once you start having those events and that becomes common knowledge and experience, then customer acceptance and willingness to invest in and accommodate potentially these systems is certainly valid. I smiled when you mentioned the ABS systems. I grew up in northern Wisconsin and instinctively knew to pump my brakes on snowy roads in the winter, and had to unlearn that behavior when automated braking systems came into being. So I understood the physics of what was going on with automatic braking systems and appreciated them from the get-go, but that's a relatively rare perspective anymore. I do think that the customer acceptance is moving ahead because of that awareness and those anecdotal stories and experiences. There still is an awful lot of mystery to the technology for a lot of people that struggle to understand it and don't know exactly what it's doing. I laughed. I tell a story occasionally. I flew into Minnesota to give a lecture at the university. I got off the plane at midnight, got into a vehicle, leaving the rental area at midnight, and it started beeping at me. And, I checked my seatbelt. I made sure the doors were closed. I looked all around. I couldn't figure out why it was beeping at me. And it happened to be, as is usually the case with rentals, new vehicles. And this had a speed warning, and the ramps out of the parking area were 5 miles an hour, and I must have been going 8 or 10 or something. And this vehicle I was driving kept telling me I was breaking the rules. But I was mystified. And I see a lot of folks that aren't accustomed to the technology kind of get nervous about it and sometimes turn it off. And I do think the way that we train and educate folks about what the technology is and what it's doing and how to use it, and particularly those technologies where they're adaptable or can be turned on and off or set or adjusted by the individual, their sensitivities, etc. We need to do a much better job of educating people on how those systems work. And not just first-time owners, recognizing a car typically goes through multiple hands. And while the original dealer on a new car purchase might do a good job of or at least offer to orient you, by the time it's in the used car lot a few times, nobody has a clue as to what's working or how it works. And I do think we'll, as an industry, need to do a better job of educating people about what's in the vehicles so that they get comfortable, particularly as these start to filter through the system and become commonplace even in used vehicles.
Is there a need?
Wait,
go ahead, Alan.
Fred, I want to disagree with Steve. I mean, discuss it a little bit. I guess if I would have given you that question on an exam, I would have flunked you. No, just joking around here. What I try to tell my students is, damn it, I don't want to work for the technology. The technology should work for me. And therefore, I would ask the OEMs to do a hell of a lot better work and do a better job in the design and the implementation of these technologies. Okay. It shouldn't just beep because you're going 3 miles an hour over the speed limit. It should figure out, it should be intelligent enough to be able to know that in fact you're a new user of this thing, and to in fact be able to say to you, hey, you're going above you're going above 3 miles an hour or whatever, and at least realize that you're in fact, this is the first time it's telling you this, or maybe just the second time, not the nth time. Okay. And instead, they've short circuit, they've just begun to develop these systems. These systems, one, should know much more about the driver than they do know, not to invade privacy, just to deliver what then in fact they're trying to deliver better. Crossing a double line, okay? It shouldn't beep every time I cross a double line. It should certainly beep and do a hell of a lot if somebody else is coming the other way at me. But if there's nobody else coming the other way, should it really beep? Should it say something? Or should, to what extent we're just at the beginning of the development of these things. And we've done the first sort of trivial piece of their design, okay? But we haven't made them so, one, they work. I mean, what's the matter with intelligent cruise control? The problem is if there's a stopped object ahead of you, it doesn't operate. Why? Because it's not sure that you can pass underneath it. And so because of that, it just, whatever. Come on, these things, not sure they need to educate us. They need to do a better job in the product.
They do. One example, and I don't think we're have different perspectives at all in terms of the need of educating the customer. Yeah. One example that I found intriguing lately, and I can't give the company credit because I don't recall which one it was, but one of the scooter rental companies has a mechanism where if you're the first time renter of their scooter, they govern the speed limit lower for the first two rides you take on the scooter for your safety. And I thought that was a clever example of, they looked at the data, the huge share of accidents are in the first couple exposures. And I was, kudos to them for taking that initiative and doing that.
No, absolutely. And I think more of that has to be, you can't just throw the problem over to the car dealer to educate you. In fact, look, they have so much bandwidth, they have so much capability in there. As the thing is happening, it should know that. It maybe should play something on the radio, not play it on the screen so you watch the screen instead of the road ahead, but remind you or whatever. I mean, come on, what's so tough? They can get people to write that code. I mean, it's cheap.
I think the real test of kind of customer acceptance of potentially the intrusiveness of these systems will be when they frankly take on the speeding issue. Obviously, they've got the capability to do that. Currently, speeding has been a huge issue during COVID with both driving faster simply because there's less traffic on the road, but reckless speeding, what I kind of argue might be a cabin fever escapist kind of thing where you're so tired of being cooped up that you get in your car and tromp on the gas and drive recklessly. And there hasn't been a willingness to step up and impact the speed with aggressive, warnings or caps. Similarly, substance abuse continues to be a
let's
safety
deal with the speed issue. Since that is, I agree with you 100%. The problem is that the industry has sold vehicles for the last 100 years based on, I can go fast. As I like to say, my speedometer in my car says that I can do 160 miles an hour. Every time I look at it, I get, I can go fast. I mean, they know that. Madison Avenue figured that out a long time ago. The madmen did that. walking away from that by them is of course, holy hell. I mean, that's tough, but they've got to do it because, man, that's ugly, right?
So are you advocating then that the vehicle should not allow you to go above a certain speed?
Well, I would think that there's a number of mechanisms you could do. You could limit the duration of that you can travel excessively fast. You can be more proactively in warning about it. There's a number of things, and frankly, I don't know exactly what would be the most effective or the most realistic in terms of customer acceptance. But speeding is a huge issue, and frankly, it's one of those that could be a resistance factor for movement towards automated vehicles. If in fact automated vehicles are going to operate at a speed limit, and people on average drive well over the speed limit, which they do empirically, we know the average speed on a freeway is 7 miles an hour over the speed limit, or whatever.
That's the average. What's the tail of that distribution?
Well, exactly. Are people willing to accept that, given they've are going to be safer? They may save some time in those same vehicles as urban travel flows smooths out, etc. Incidents are reduced, but that's a big lump to swallow for some folks, that the idea that you're not going to be able to travel at the speed you want. And I think to some extent it'll be a good test of public willingness to absorb and accept some of these technologies, to see if they're willing to have some oversight over their speed.
Well, but what I tend to say on that is that we really need two different standards, one for people and one for computers, unfortunately, because people have a distribution associated with what the hell they're going to do, and of course what one's trying to do with these conditions, limits, rules, blah blah blah, is to get people to behave and stay with it, and basically get people to behave. Whereas with automated system, then you just write the code, okay, and it's going to behave. The distribution is essentially a directional function. It's tight. It's not like humans. You got to deal with the whole group, so that the whole group will behave properly. So I mean, to me, that is so difficult. I mean, I just don't know how we're going to do that.
Well, I do think it's going to be a good test of public's attitudes, and in that sense, I'd love to see us start to experiment with that and see what we learn.
Yeah, me too. I mean, when I always like talking about United Airlines. When I get in United Airlines, get on a flight, I want to run up and pound on the door and tell the pilot, "Go faster, go faster." I want to go fast. I don't know. The whole damn thing might be automated, as far as I know. I don't know if there's anybody there. They've locked the door. I don't know what the hell they're doing in there. That it could be automated. But damn it, I don't get to go fast or slow. Cool. I'm good.
Stephen, what are your thoughts about the potential for some of these newer safety technologies to be required to be put into vehicles, or if not required, should the government be, and we've been talking about this lately too, offering incentives the way they're offering incentives for EVs?
I think the acceptance of the technologies in the new vehicles is really ramping up quite rapidly. We're now seeing more and more of these technologies in entry-level vehicles. Early on, they were in the expensive option packages where you had to buy the luxury version, etc. But that's not the case. And I do think, safety has been a selling point for vehicles for a long time. And I do think we're going to see the market penetration of these technologies in a big way in the next several years. I do think there will be issues to make sure they transition as the vehicles age, and are these systems going to continue to be maintainable and functional, and are they going to influence the reliability or the economic life of the vehicle, etc. Are we going to, just like you can get notice for a brake light burnt out or something like that, are we going to have any kind of mechanism to make sure that these systems are are working, and if they're not working, does the operator know they're not working? Some of those things I think will influence their penetration of the full fleet over time. But I'm not worried about I do think they'll make it into the new vehicle fleet. Like I said, I think it's the transition period that will be interesting to see how over the next decade or so, as those systems penetrate into the secondary market, are they still functional and used, et cetera, by then drivers of those vehicles. Those, I think, will be some of the challenges and issues associated with it.
I agree with you there, Steve. I mean, I'm really encouraged. Went into Subaru dealer and Volvo dealers not too long ago, and the extent to which these systems are available throughout the line, and the knowledge, and really in some sense almost an enthusiasm from the sales side. I just walked in, trying to be a person off the street with respect to it. So I do think they are getting into certainly the new car fleet. People are buying them because they're being stole. How the extent to which they're really using them, they're really not turn offable, and things like that. But the education and really the quality of these things really needs this, I think, continue to substantially improve, as we were discussing a few minutes ago. So I really think they're getting there. And in some sense, if you look at Elon, unfortunately, Elon's gone a little bit too far, but and it should pull back. But in some sense, technology, and not just the electric motor, is selling Teslas. And to talk about $7,000 upticks for whatever he calls it, even though it's not what he calls it, and maybe it's just the halo effect. I don't know, but it seems to be on the positive side of the adoption scale.
And the millennial generation is, the jokes of the baby boomers were, we worried about horsepower and et cetera, and they worry about gigs and computing speed and those kinds of things. And some of the bragging points are the technology in the vehicle, not what's under the hood. And so yes, I do think there's acceptance of the younger generation of the technology, and it's a cool factor. And so again, like I say, I think it'll be accepted. It should be recognized, though, that new cars are really a fairly narrow audience of the folks that are buying new cars. That's a thin slice of the upper income audience that buys those, and the rental car industry, I might add. I had 11% roughly of new cars before COVID. So it's getting them in the hands of the secondary market that I think will be another test.
Yeah, wouldn't it be amazing if, in the trunk is an NVIDIA, like Intel's under the whatever, NVIDIA's in the trunk. I mean, that would be interesting if all of a sudden we see some ads coming out of the car manufacturer saying, you got your GPU back there.
Yeah, well, and one of the companies had a charging station and a scooter that was packaged in the trunk of their vehicle to get from parking to your destination. So they'll try anything. So.
I guess, I think that's a good comment. Yeah, they'll try anything.
Stephen, to shift gears, if you forgive that for a second, companies, at least one company, Waymo, have had to make a decision as to when their automated vehicles are safe enough to pull safety attendants. What are your thoughts about that, and when is safe enough?
That's a neat question, and one that I've given a little bit of thought to, is particularly, frankly, as I looked over some of the safety data during the COVID period and saw the huge ramp up in fatalities during that period. It was very disconcerting. and a lot of that is behaviorally related. It's risk-taking young people that are driving more because they're less likely to forego activities. It's substance abuse, it's speeding, you know, those kinds of things. And so you think about it from that lens of, well, what's safe enough? And is what that made me reflect on was, I don't do those risky behaviors in my own driving. Something like 40% of fatalities are associated with alcohol or substance abuse. And, you know, there's mechanical condition of vehicles and recklessness and driving in inclement conditions and taking risks, etc. So if I, as a driver, don't do those things myself, my safety risk isn't the industry average. It's some fraction of that. And while I could certainly be a victim of somebody else's carelessness, the reality is that my safety risk is far under the average. So if I were personally looking at, you know, what standard of safety do I want to have in that vehicle before I relinquish my right to drive and rely on my own judgment for safety, it would have to be a darn lot better than the average. I wouldn't be satisfied with a vehicle advertising that it did 10% better than the average on fatalities. I'd want it to do a lot better than the average in terms of accidents and fatalities. So I do think that that's a very high bar. It just is. It's going to be a tough standard to meet, and it really begs the, you know, the technology being, you know, very refined before we go fully driverless. And then, of course, the challenge will be we might be able to deliver that very high standard in certain physical environments, but not others. And are those vehicles then not going to be, you know, sufficiently reliable or robust for use in all kinds of situations or topographies or geographies or weather conditions, et cetera? And is that going to stymie their acceptance in a broader sense, where we would fully transition to, you know, reliance on an automated vehicle? So I do think that that's going to take some time and some learning before we kind of assimilate to understand where those touch points are. It may suggest a deployment model where they're incidental and relied on by persons that don't have personal vehicles or are relied upon for, you know, urban trips in certain environments where a household perhaps has fewer vehicles and uses automated vehicles and services for some share of their trips, but not all of them. I think that that's almost inevitable as a model for a number of years, at a minimum during a transition period. But it's going to have to be a pretty high number, that safety number, before folks will be willing to relinquish driving, particularly safe drivers.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, I agree with you. I sort of say we're all really good drivers unless we misbehave.
Yeah.
The misbehavior that leads to the chaos. It's the speeding, it's the tailgating, it's the drinking, it's the falling asleep, it's whatever. Those are all misbehaviors. And as long as we don't misbehave, we are really good. And therefore, the probably the safety thing of this thing is going to be as good as we are when we're not misbehaving. Now, the good thing about the automated thing is that it really, if it's programmed right in its operational design domain, which is really important, then maybe one can achieve that level of safety to be not because it won't misbehave, to be that good, but within that constrained set of whatever that happens to be. Okay. And that allows us to get started. The thought that these things can sort of go anywhere is like goofy, and go all the places that we go is next to goofy. But to be in some places that deliver some mobility values, which is me the only reason to be driverless, is to be able to get the folks who for whatever reason can or don't want to drive, to at least be able to satisfy some of their quality of life mobility needs. You know, in those places, maybe we can make these things so that they are as good as as we drive in those areas at those times, in those situations, blah, 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 as we are when we don't misbehave. I don't know. What do you think, Dave?
I think an unfortunate aspect is the folks that probably most need the enhanced safety of driving are the last ones that'll be in a position to benefit from it simply because of the cost or price curve if it relates to buying the vehicles, or even if it relates to paying for the service. Those folks that are inclined to have risky behaviors aren't as likely to be the first in line to take advantage of these services. It does beg the scenarios, though, for example, where as enforcement discipline, sometimes people lose driver's licenses, etc., where you could see enforcement being somebody that has their second speeding violation, that they're told that they need to rely on mobility services for the next 3 months as part of their penalty, or DUIs or other things where you're no longer allowed not to drive a car with certain features in it, for example. I'm hopeful that we'll have technologies that can identify distracted driving and impaired driving and shut down vehicles, etc., and so that we can put a dent in some of those problems. So there may be some regulatory or other elements that help us move the curve on safety in situations where those markets might not otherwise be first in line for automated services or automated vehicles with technology.
Yeah, the sort of the problem with the vehicle that shuts down. The problem is the people that misbehave are just going to clip the wires, or they're not going to buy those things. They're going to go back and buy a 55 Chevy or something like that doesn't even have seatbelts and not even an airbag or whatever. I mean, it's a really tough situation. Hopefully, we'll have driverless vehicles in a big enough operational design domain so that when they see that they can use those things and basically get the same mobility as they had, they'll say, "Hell, I don't even need to drive anymore. I'm good. Thank you. I didn't know that existed. I'm wonderful." That's kind of what I hope gets created, I guess.
Yeah, it will be interesting to look at data as these systems, including the driver assist, penetrate the market. Will they have a discernible impact on overall crash and safety statistics? And again, we're likely to see those adopted by the safest segment of the market already. So it may not be as meaningful, at least in aggregate, as we hope, because of that adoption curve situation. But I'm sure folks with data will be looking at that and trying to understand how they are influencing safety behaviors and safety performance.
In terms of the distribution of who's out there driving, I think last week we had Diane Roth on with us, and she pointed out very, very well that the problem with the higher deaths per VMT that was really reported is probably due to all the people that are nice, safe drivers were also adhering to the rules about staying home, and therefore
yes,
they didn't accumulate any vehicle miles traveled. The only vehicle miles traveled were basically by the misbehaviors. And they misbehave the way they always misbehave, maybe even a little bit more, as you pointed out. So that when you then look at the rates, there was nobody to bring the rates down. That's
right.
Because because we're the big guys. Of course, we're the big guys. We're staying home, right? I mean, it's really an issue, and hey, we want diversity. We want people. We don't want everybody to be the same. Absolutely. But
Right. And young people are obviously less susceptible to serious consequence from COVID and hence more likely to be willing to take activity participation risks than seniors. So they're a larger share of the vehicles on the road and they have a higher risk profile in driving just in general as it relates to age. So, all of those are part of it. But the data was pretty compelling. The substance abuse numbers were up dramatically. The non-seatbelt compliance was up dramatically. It was really disheartening to see that.
As you were saying, Alan, it's who's doing the driving, right?
If you also talk to police will tell you, geez, the number of people that are driving over 90 miles an hour and so on.
Yeah.
And I'm noting, I was driving yesterday down to Mays Landing, and man, on 295, I guess it's end of the month, there must have been 8 people pulled over. I guess, whatever. I'm glad they were out there because they really haven't been out there earlier this month. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think enforcement did lag. There was a kind of increased, obviously they were diverted in many communities, but there was also increased sensitivity of the conflict point between people and police and enforcement, making enforcement more lax, and I think there's a consequence to all of that. We need to
also
have
they weren't pulling over the marginal speeder because the potential COVID interaction with that.
Exactly.
All that.
Yeah.
You have to respect them for that.
Sure.
So they had plenty of really bad speeders, I guess. So yes, all those things go in there. Fred.
Well, I got to tap the brakes for a second.
That's great.
We'll be back with more, but first, this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, please head to motoetf.com. On the website, look for a white paper called The Smart Transportation Revolution. It's under the Insights and News tab. You can find some great information there to help you make informed decisions about investing. You may know that ETFs can be a smart way to spread risk and focus on a particular category of stocks. The site, once again, is motoetf.com. Alan, some headlines to touch on this week. First off, General Motors announcing it plans to phase out gasoline-powered cars and trucks, selling only zero-emission vehicles by 2035. Yay, but, huh?
Fred, you're going to get me in trouble again. I don't know. Yeah, great. GM's going to put out the zero emitting vehicles. But of course, the question still begs the question that the energy that's being used to create the electricity, to what extent is that marginal energy zero emitting in itself? And you need the energy when you're somewhere down the road. That means you have to carry it with you. And the thing so that you have it when you need it, and the thing that you're using to carry it with you, to what extent is that zero emitting, to really have a zero emitting vehicle? So, it's not as simple as just having the vehicle not do it. The vehicle's not doing it if it's sitting there. Great, okay. If it starts to move, then you have to worry about what it's using to move it and where it's moving. And it's not a slam dunk. Okay, may very well be. We may very well be by 2035 have complete electric generation from zero emitting sources. I don't know. Whatever.
I got to say, my vehicles for the last 9 months have pretty much been zero emission.
Yeah, I know, because they sat there. I know that. That's great. That's my point. It's great to have a vehicle, but the vehicle, if it's going to be useful, it's got to move. And so I think it's a little bit disingenuous of General Motors to go out there and tout that. I think we have to be careful here. And of course, we want to get to that point. But we have to look at what gets us there and what gets us there, in a practical way, and so on and so forth. And it may not be just as easy as making the vehicle be zero emitting.
So new forms of generation for
Oh,
electricity,
we got
obviously.
we got it, because right now the marginal energy is created by coal, because there's still coal electricity being produced. So if all of a sudden I then make a new demand on electricity, what has to be fired up? Coal. Okay.
Stephen, I think you wanted to jump in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anytime somebody touts the 2035 goal, I don't take it too seriously, simply because there's a lot of time between now and then to learn from market and technology and other things and see what actually happens. It certainly seems like a noble goal that will play well in this environment. There is a fair number of pieces of equipment used in industry and commerce, et cetera, that transition to electric may or may not be the environmentally smart thing to do for some special purpose equipment. And people need to think through, what kind of equipment are we going to use in emergency response and relief and storms and hurricanes and other things when infrastructure is under pressure. So that all needs to be thought through carefully. In terms of the mainline personal vehicles, household vehicles, et cetera, it certainly seems like a noble goal, but I very much agree with Alain that obviously it depends upon the full energy cycle associated with the vehicles, from production, propulsion, and disposal at the end, and what's the full environmental consequence, and weighing that all carefully in making those kinds of decisions in terms of what's most appropriate.
Alan, go ahead, Alan.
To me, what the best thing that sort of has happened is basically over the last 10 years, we've probably had an order of magnitude improvement in batteries. And that is substantial, because that's probably more improvement in batteries than we made in the previous 150 years of batteries or something like that. So if we can really improve the batteries and of course improve what they're made of, and where you source that, and how heavy they are, and all those kinds of things, certainly helps that whole equation. The generation of the electricity is also, my goodness, you look at the electric generation charts, and you look at electricity, at the amount of loss that's included, that's part of electricity, and all the energy that really comes out of whatever you create it from ends up dissipating and going in as heat and loss or whatever. Those are tough questions, and so it's not just an easy headline.
Right. Well, a few other quick headlines to touch on, Alan. Aurora has completed the acquisition of Uber's self-driving car unit. Put out the press release this week, so that's a done deal now.
Yeah, I'm really proud of that. I think that's really good that the two groups got together. I mean, I think that again, this is really necessary. If we're going to get to more than 1% of the person miles being done through ride hailing, we've got to find another way to do the driver, because there aren't enough drivers, and two, they're too expensive. If you end up having, and you should pay them a living wage so that they can feed their family. An automated system does not have a family to feed. Man, that is an enormous opportunity. And in fact, all those systems still behave by Moore's law. Moore's law, for some reason, hasn't ended. And that means, the performance is going to go up in the future, and the cost is going to go down. I mean, those are enormous forces, fundamental. And so I don't know. That's kind of the way I look at that. And I'm really happy for that coming together. That there's going to be a strong competitor and producer out there.
I don't say this often, Alan, but your volume's a little bit low. So if you can speak about
okay. Yes, I'm thrilled by that.
Well, Tesla reported earnings this week, and Elon Musk again promised full self-driving by the end of this year, and he's planning a subscription model for that as well. And he talked about the revenue potential for the Tesla robo-taxi business being immense.
Hey, the only other thing Elon needs to do on that is say, if anything bad happens, it's on me. I'll take care of that. I've got your back. Okay. He hasn't said that yet. He said, you can have all this, but you're responsible.
That's the big question mark in this business model he's talking about.
Yeah. I mean, so, all these great things, fine. Okay. If anything should go south, Elon, you're not essentially the richest guy. You got my back. If you don't, please stop.
And there's been a little bit of a war on words between Elon and John Krafcik at Waymo, back and forth online about Krafcik saying that Tesla really doesn't have true self-driving. And of course, it goes back and forth.
They don't. They're not close. Their manual says you got to sit there and pay attention. I'm gonna go buy one of their cars and send it out to Steve and go give Steve a ride someplace. Yeah, Steve, don't trust me, okay? Now, if Elon says he got you, go for it, okay? But
I trust you on these more than Elon in terms of.
You can't trust me. I'm not that good. Sorry. I mean, I'm a charlatan here. Are you joking? I mean, it's not even. Come on, Elon. You're doing great stuff, but you don't have to stop.
Let me push back a little bit on the cost issue as well.
Yeah.
When you say there's not a mouth to feed, there isn't a driver's mouth to feed. But at this point, all of the mobility services that we're looking at have a very non-trivial cost to administer and execute them. You're all of a sudden adding a significant capital cost of vehicle ownership to the operation. You've got the storage, cleaning, maintenance, scheduling, customer interaction, all of those costs. In the public transit industry, it's been a number of years since I looked at the data, but we typically had 3 or 4 person hours of labor for every hour that a vehicle was on the street, handling maintenance and all of the other scheduling and supervising, etc. And I don't know what those numbers are going to ultimately be for these automated systems. But until we've got enough experience with their reliability and incidents and customer interactions and payments, etc., storage, charging, we really need to be careful about assuming what a cost structure is going to look like. I think we've got a lot of logistics and venture capital people looking at these and thinking we're moving boxes around instead of people, and that the reality of what it costs to move people and have the services in place to deal with customers, it's not going to be cheap. Whether or not it's meaningfully different than personal vehicle ownership, I'm not convinced. Might it be cheaper than taxi and Uber? Yeah, it might. But I think the proof is in the pudding on these. We need to see what really happens. What other regulatory and other costs.
I agree. I think that's why there's still going to be jobs here. This is not, getting rid of jobs. The jobs are different. I'd like to argue that a lot of those things actually, might be algorithmic in nature, and algorithms can do much of it, but a lot of the cleaning, a lot of all those customer service, all those things that are really, you point out, yes, those are expenses. Whether or not we put it out there and we can then, to me, the key is being able to do rideshare. If in fact, we're going to continue to have an Uber Lyft in which there is no ride sharing, there is no ride sharing in Uber Lyft, there just isn't. It's one person in there or a group traveling together, essentially. I don't know, 99.9, not that bad, but it's really bad. But if we can get to a point in which we have 2 or 3 people in there, which we've got to get to that. If we don't get to that, then the driverless model probably doesn't come out. It doesn't. And us us having it, we don't need, I don't, any of us who can drive and don't need a driverless model. And whether or not you then go through all the expense of creating a driverless thing for the relatively few people that can't drive, that then go by themselves, and now that thing's going to be expensive, and you know, it doesn't look good as a business model, I think. You know,
Yep, I think it's going to be challenging.
yeah, it's challenging. It's challenging. I mean, we need sharing, and we need that. But I think if we can get the sharing, and we can provide mobility, especially to, I like to say, the people who can't afford it, or the folks that can only afford one car. What are the other three people in the
And even the sharing in a vehicle without a driver is a challenge.
enormous challenge.
You know, it's a behavioral challenge, and obviously
enormous. Yeah.
There's gender sensitivity, and I'll, you know, tease folks about the, you know, the guy in the MAGA hat getting in the vehicle with the other passenger having a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, and, you know, maybe this won't work in a shared vehicle. And so there are issues, and it's not going to be simple to fill up vehicles.
We can be smart enough to, you know, to avoid those things, whether we all can learn to behave and respect each other. I mean, you know,
Maybe they make that part of the app. You fill out your questionnaire.
They partner with one of the dating services and find out what profile questions they need to include to test compatibility of fellow riders. The other thing is we
absolutely that is a serious comment from you. I think, of course, we need to do that.
Yeah. The other thing is, anytime you do that, you interject uncertainty, trip circuity, average, you know, increased travel time. You know, the paratransit industry has a 10 to 15% no-show rate. You know, how do you treat that? You're sitting there waiting for somebody that's, you know, forgot their portfolio on the kitchen table and didn't get to the vehicle when they should have, and you're sitting there waiting. Those are all kind of realities that are going to influence kind of this optimality that sometimes we see in our logistics estimations.
Yeah, well, no, I agree. But you know, I think some of these are solvable, and I think, look, I think it also makes a better society if we have better respect for each of us, even if you are wearing you know, I attack the Capitol t-shirt or whatever. I don't know. I mean, we got to stop fighting with each other. Anyway, I don't know. Whatever.
Well, a few. I'm going to jump in again.
But I don't think we should give up because of it. Okay, we shouldn't use that as an excuse.
No, I mean, technology has been the savior for mobility. I mean, if we look at what's happened on safety and energy and everything else, it's the technology that's done it. It's not the planners and policymakers.
Right. I agree. Yeah.
Well, finally, Alan, a few names from China in the headlines here. Baidu has received a permit from the state of California to test self-driving cars without a driver behind the wheel. Didi has raised $300 million for its self-driving unit. And Xpeng has started rolling out its new autonomous highway driving features to some customers, ramping things up and challenging Tesla. So.
Well, you know, I'll take the easy one. Didi, you know, realizing that if they really want to scale, that they need the driverless piece. Again, you know, same as Uber and Lyft. I think, you know, to have chauffeur services out there for folks, 1% of the person miles. Okay, I think you're limited. And I wanted to also comment. Steve put out a pie chart in a group that we have that's exchanging information. I think it was you, Steve, that showed 1% of the vehicle miles, of the person miles in transit. Did I read that
You read that correctly.
Correctly?
You did. If we looked at trips, it would be a bigger slice of the pie. But transit trips are inherently short. And if you look at in passenger miles, it's a very small number. It's inner city and urban transit combined are about 1% of total person miles of travel. Yeah, it's a very small share.
It's a very niche business.
Yes.
To me, I think that the opportunity with driverless is you can take that niche business and you can
And
okay, and if you can that's what drives me nuts about the transit industry. They have yet to, at least in any way, begun to even think about this thing as an opportunity for them to 10x. And they're just, unfortunately, I guess, comfortable in their 1%. I don't want to say that, it gets me in trouble all the time. But, it's really a shame, because this is to me, that's what driverless is. It is transit. It's providing mobility. Hey, Uber, Lyft should be counted in transit. They provide mobility. Okay, what does New Jersey Transit do? It provides mobility. Okay, what does United Airlines do? It provides mobility. Just because one gets their money from the public and the other one gets the money out of my pocket, why is that such a big, never mind.
well, all of this is a part, Alan, of the fourth annual Princeton Smart Driving Car Summit, which is well underway now. Great session again this week. It's taking place every Thursday at noon live. Steve jumped in with us this week. It was terrific. Great session there. And people can find more information to register, maybe even to sponsor, at smartdrivingcar.com. Really a terrific start we're off to with that, Alan.
Yeah, we had a great time yesterday. It was really, I thought it was fantastic. It's been really good, and hope people join in and whatever. And Steve, thank you so very much for being with.
I enjoyed it immensely, and we just scratched the surface. The whole transit and automation discussion could take a huge block of time alone, but enjoyed the opportunity to share some thoughts and hear your perspectives.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it, Steve. Thank you also to our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO, and more information is available at motoetf.com. You can find us, once again, at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, Spreaker, SoundCloud, wherever you get podcasts. Amazon has us now, and Amazon Music too, or on Audible. Ask your smart speaker to play us. You can find my tech reports at techstination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with Alain Kornhauser. Thank you for listening or watching, and please continue to stay safe.
And have a great weekend.